From Chicago's CAN TV, a look at the week's events is reported in the newspapers, in the blogs and online, and on radio and TV. This is Chicago Newsroom.
And hello again. Welcome to another edition of Chicago Newsroom here on CAN TV. We have all the papers spread out because we have so much to do today. And I want everyone all together now to say, this is what Access TV looks like. Chicago Newsroom here. Elias Cepeda joining us today. Actually, on an important day for you. It's the first day of Make Big Plans Chicago, your new blog, right? Your new
Yeah,
operation.
it is. No, thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's just going to be basically about Chicago politics, culture, and sports, all type of stuff that I geek out on. And it's going to be at Tumblr.
It's just gone live today, so if you're watching this at 6:30 tonight, or if you're watching it online, you can hop right over and see it. Something new, and we'll keep an eye on this, see how this goes. Hal Dardick joining us again today from the Chicago Tribune, Plot Street. Thank you, Hal, for being here, because you have been sort of like in the middle of the giant revolution that's happening at the, or is it just a revolt? It's a revolt is a small revolution, right?
Yeah, well, you're making it sound pretty good. No,
well, if I were Alderman
there's some aldermen trying to get some notice and not happy with the mayor's plans.
Well, we'll certainly be talking about that. And Mr. Steve Edwards joining us here today from WBEZ, Chicago Public Media. So glad to have you on the program, Steve. I think it's the first time you've been here, so I'm
honored to be here. Yeah.
Really glad to have you here. We've got so many different things going on, but I do want to sort of start over at City Hall because I find it just fascinating that 28 aldermen signed a letter to Mayor Emanuel saying, we are moderately unhappy with some of
a couple of things
that you've done, and we demand that you listen to us and maybe have a meeting with the budget director if it's okay with you, if you don't mind too much, so that we might be able to then vote 100% in favor of your budget.
I like the way you characterize that. No, there were certainly there was a majority of aldermen, and they were able to sign a letter and say, these are the things in your budget proposal that we're concerned about. Library cuts, which I think a lot of people are really concerned about. The dispatcher cuts at the 911 center. The fact that the sticker prices are going to go up for 183,000 larger vehicles in the city of Chicago. And they said these are the things that we agree on that we would like to see some change in the budget, and we're going to write a letter and release it to the media, you know, and so that everybody's aware that we're not happy with this stuff. But you're right, in the end, a lot of those folks are going to end up voting for that budget, however it comes down. I think the fascinating thing was earlier in the day, after Budget Director Alex Holt had testified about some things before the Budget Committee of the City Council, and we got our side and said, well, we know there's some things that are going to have to give. Every year something gives in the budget, especially, you know, this library thing. And what are you going to give on? She says, well, I don't know. We're still talking to the alderman. And, you know, our door's open and they can come in and talk to us, but yet the alderman felt it was necessary to write this letter.
Right. And then didn't even she say yesterday, or the mayor said, well, if you want to have a meeting with the budget director, sure, you can have that.
Well, as a matter of fact, they had a meeting yesterday.
And there's another one on Friday.
That's correct, yeah.
So, okay, well, they fought for their right to have a meeting with the budget director, and they won. So
Something they already had, you know, essentially a right to. I could be way off base, but I sense a little bit of sarcasm in your characterization of the revolt. And I mean, what real legislatures do when they have a majority is just take action. Of course, the Chicago City Council gave away their right to create a budget a long time ago. And if we had a real revolt or rebellion or any real streak of independence, they would be moving along those lines to go back and say, you know what, we're Chicago's legislature, and we're going to make our own budget as opposed to trying to get little
turn
meetings.
this into Madison, Wisconsin? we have rules here.
I mean, it is interesting, though, because it's been a long time since we've seen really any significant number of aldermen actually express some public desire to see something else in a budget proposal in this particular fashion. Occasionally we'd have one or two aldermen or a small handful, but to have 28 come forward this way. And yet, you know, my big question is, what are the other options on the table as Rahm Emanuel tries to figure out how to balance this budget, and what are aldermen bringing forth that represents a realistic economic and political alternative? And you know, I'm sure there are some out there, but I haven't seen much coverage of that yet, and much evidence.
Well, Carol Marin had a very interesting conversation last night on her show with Sposato and a few others, and said, isn't it true that virtually all the aldermen support the dropping of the head tax, which is, you know, $27–30 million a year of income? So that may or may not be a good idea to support that, but you were in favor of cutting 30-something, $25 to $30 million.
23 million.
It's 23 million.
Some huge amount of money, and so you're trying to have it both ways. You're willing to cut the revenue, and you also want to not cut you want to reduce the amount of expenditure cuts. So you kind of have to be a little bit more, you got to bring something to the table, and what is that?
Well, they have, actually in the discussion, one of the things that they did raise, as I understand it, is an idea, they're declaring a surplus in the tax increment finance system. So the city's going to get a pretty small amount of money in the scheme of things. I think like $16 million out of that. The public schools will get a lot more. It's out of $60 million total. And so they want to double the amount that's declared surplus. Of course, the administration is trying to say, well, we're being very conservative on that. We don't want to do too much because we need that money for development. So, but they
also,
did.
that's one time, right?
Well, the administration says they're going to do this every year now. That the TIF law actually requires them to do that, and it hasn't been done. And every year they're going to look at it and see what funds are not dedicated to specific projects and say, hey, we're going to take a portion of those and we're going to refund that to the various taxing bodies. But you know, that varies year by year, and Lawrence Vassallo or the Civic Federation calls it a one-time deal because it can't be something that you can rely on every year.
It's so, like the head tax.
Although he certainly complimented this administration on moving forward and away from a lot of those one-time deals that had characterized the past few budgets, but said they haven't moved away entirely.
He said there's $75 million out of, you know, closing the $636 million hole. About $75 million is one-time revenue, refinancing the TIF district thing. There was another item or two in there, but on the whole, he said, yeah, the good job of moving away from that. We'd like to see it completely eliminated. And guess what? In 2 years, you got a huge $500 million pension liability.
Then you get the pensions coming. That's coming down. It's that slow-moving freight train. That's
well, and to me, that almost sets up the much bigger battle. It's the contract negotiations coming up with the police and fire. I mean, where you talk about pensions, you also talk about just the personnel costs, benefits, wages, things like that, that can't really be reflected in any proposal for this particular budget, but could dramatically affect the way in which the budget shapes up in the years forward. And I don't know what your reporting suggests about how that might shape up here some months from now, but it seems to me that could be a much bigger battle.
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head with the union contracts, and the firefighters may be reducing the trucks from $65 million. Right there, the unions are totally opposed, and so is Fire Commissioner Robert Hoff. You know, so but there are a lot of things in these union contracts that can be changed. More managed competition, as they call it, where they have the unions compete against private enterprise to reduce the cost of work, and whoever comes in with the lower cost gets the work. You're going to see a lot of stuff. But a lot of those contracts don't expire until after 2016 because Mayor Daley was hoping for the Olympics.
Well, you know, that is to me such a big issue, the thing with the fire department, because you know, some of us remember being around for the 1980 battle with Mayor Byrne. And I mean, I think my own view is that that's one of the things that just completely undid her. I mean, she, rightly so, looked at the fire department and said, you know, it's time for us to start doing some serious reforms in this fire department, and look where it got her. So I think the political historians are probably heavily looking at this one and saying, that's the real third rail of Chicago politics. You don't touch, because you know, there's something sort of organically different between the fire department and the police department. The police department, you have a sense that, I don't know, it's sort of more blanketed, but the fire department, you want that hook and ladder truck, you want that pumper, you want that ambulance somewhere where you can practically look out your front porch and see it, so you know that you're being protected this way. And I don't know, it just seems to me they have this phenomenal argument that it's like, okay, if you don't want to be so protected, next time your house is on fire, fine, vote for this.
Yeah, a lot of things have changed, though.
Haven't they,
in the
though?
last 20 years?
Yeah, or before that.
Because there's a lot of fire suppression equipment in these high-rises that's automatic, and there's not nearly as many fires. As
Building
there used to be.
materials have
And
changed
they're
a
doing
lot.
more and more calls for medical services.
right.
So they can make these arguments. Robert House says, no, we still need all these folks. I think there's going to be an interesting debate in the Inspector General's report, which sort of first raised the issue, and people keep saying it recommended. It really didn't. He said this is an option, and he had the pros and the cons, and you read the pros and the cons, and you're like, well, it sounds great. We should reduce that, and then you read the pros, and then you read the cons, and you're like, well, maybe not. So you can have quite a debate.
Well, I mean, we've observed on the show before that the fire department really has kind of slowly evolved into a medical emergency service that also puts out fires. And that's true everywhere. It's true everywhere in probably the world, certainly in the United States, as building materials and building designs have changed, and we just don't have the vast swaths of wooden tenement buildings that we used to have. So, things have changed. But
what they'll probably want to do when the time comes is to make a real, to the really good points you just made, is probably make a good populist type of argument, kind of looking towards the police deployment ACLU lawsuit. I mean, they might want to say, the fire department, then we're needed in the whole large areas of Chicago and neighborhoods and communities that haven't had these types of upgrades in their buildings, that are really underprotected, underserved. And if you cut back here, you're going to really be cutting back on folks that don't have a whole lot of say. So that's an interesting thing. I don't know that they'll do it. But I think, to your point, I mean, with all the advancements that have been made, that might be their best kind of argument to hang their heads on.
It's a very interesting thought that you could apply the same thing that's being applied to the police and just say, we really don't need so much protection out here in these suburban style, northwest
enclaves
side
of Chicago.
That is actually part of the argument, that where there aren't the high rises, you don't need as many people on a truck. That suburban areas are doing it with less, and they're not having it.
But I think this gets back to a point you were making earlier, Ken. I mean, fundamentally, it seems that while there may be pro and con lists in terms of whether this makes good policy, that these, in the end, are really political questions, right? Totally. So on the police redeployment question, you can line up the stats all day long. The Chicago News Cooperative did it most recently. Dan Mihalopoulos and Hunter Klaus did a great analysis of where those deployments are actually shaking up. And it's hard to argue with those statistics. And yet, do you want to be an alderman?
Right.
Even if you agree that there's an opportunity to sort of make things more efficient in your ward, to be the guy or the gal who says, sure, fine, take a few more of these officers.
That's fine. Take them. We don't really need them.
Absolutely. So the only way out of that, it seems, is you either have to add a net increase in officers to bring the other districts up to par, or do something that moves this beyond almost, I think, like the defense closing commission that Congress did, some decades ago to close military bases. You almost have to move this out of the NIMBY equation.
The politics is interesting. When Mayor Emanuel announced that he was going to close 3 police stations in the city, he said, "Guess what? I'm closing mine."
Right.
So it was a way to make the political point that I'm comfortable, you should be too. Okay, well, I have a guard, but that's another story.
I don't want to get too far away from the library discussion. This is one that I find incredibly interesting. Now, again, I disclaim this all the time on the show, but I used to work for Mayor Daley. I was in Mayor Daley's press office, so sometimes I say these things, and I'm just I know that people are just saying, what a shelfie. But you got to say, Mary Dempsey is a commissioner who is really apart from all the others. I mean, she was there almost for the entire Daley administration, an empire builder that makes, cultural affairs look small by comparison. She has built libraries all over the place, and they have been very successful, and it probably doesn't feel real good to her that she's the one who's taking the largest number of hits as far as personnel and all the rest of it. So I think there's some just incredibly interesting politics going on with the library thing. One of the things that she always used to say, because I ought to know, I used to do the videos that that put this out there on the street, but she would brag about the fact that We go into the neighborhoods where nobody wants to go, where there's no economic development, there's no even city development of any kind. We'll go out there and we'll put a library.
A brand new library.
A brand new, beautiful library stocked with books and staff and all that. And people will start coming there, and the next thing you know, there's a little coffee shop kind of trying to build next door, and before you know it, there's a whole group of people sort of huddled around the library. And I think you saw that happen a bunch of times in certain areas of the city. The one on Division Street by Cabrini Green was the first. I mean, that's a really, well, anyway,
Yeah,
you get the idea.
Yeah.
So I put this out to you. What is going on with the library? Is Rahm Emanuel or are the aldermen beginning to think that maybe we've gone too far? We have too many libraries. We have too much money being spent on libraries. Is there too much money that can be spent
They're still
on
building libraries.
They're still building them.
They're going to build 2 more, maybe 3 more.
Yeah.
In
And
the
as long
coming
as
year.
Dempsey's around, they'll be building more, I'm sure. But that's the question. That's the question that Emanuel must be facing right now: is when is enough?
It's a little safer. Oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
It's a little safer probably in especially hard economic times to get at these things where the value is less tangible. I mean, there's a whole hierarchy of needs, and when people are worried about employment, about all sorts of more, just again, tangible things, you can kind of sneak those things in there, and folks, it may not be the same type of outcry, despite the value. You mentioned areas that have kind of become hubs in Blue Island and 18th Street in Pilsen with the Rudy Lozano Library.
Lozano
That really did happen. There's cafes that were never there before around there. There's a whole lot of development around there. The radio station across the street came after
Radio
the museum
Arte,
brought it.
yeah.
Exactly, Radio Arte. So that really does happen. It's a real thing. But I think when there's other things that aldermen and the mayor want to protect, it's probably something that they may be able to get away with. Now, as to internal politics and whether or not I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, no, I think they're getting a fair amount of grief about it. It is one, it's pretty far up on the top of their list of things they'd like to change. But yeah, it's not like police protection, certainly, or fire protection, where you can create a lot of
Why do you think that they decided to hit the libraries with the largest number of personnel cuts? I mean, they got like 50% or more, didn't they, of the actual number of personnel cuts? What was the politics there?
There's a lot of things that you just, because of contracts and so forth, that you can't cut because of various complications and services that the city has to deliver. Now, a lot of people would argue the libraries are pretty essential, but they're not. It's not police and fire.
Right.
It's not.
It's
not
not
taking
even
your
It's not
garbage
sanitation,
out.
yep.
It's not keeping your water pumped.
Yeah,
to your
yeah,
home.
yeah.
But I do think that even though it's a huge number of people, it's not a huge amount of money in the whole scheme of the budget. And Joe Moore told me yesterday that you're going to see, he thinks you'll see some of that money come back, that there'll be some adjustments made. People are unhappy enough.
Well,
about
my
that.
own observation is that Mary Dempsey is probably the most skilled behind-the-scenes operator in the
administration.
Has been. I don't know if it's in this administration. I can't speak to, but she's pretty clever, and I'm sure she's working. Pulling every lever she can. I'm sorry, Steve.
I was just going to say really quickly that one of the interesting things here too is this, for folks outside of Chicago, and even many inside, Mayor Daley's work, along with Mary Dempsey, on expanding and overhauling and upgrading the library system in Chicago was seen as one of his shining achievements. Robert Putnam, the Harvard sociologist, wrote an entire chapter about Chicago public libraries and what happened under Daley in one of his books on the sociology of sort of third places. Furthermore, you look at what libraries are doing beyond just reading, but access to computers and the internet and multimedia, community meeting places, and you think about youth violence, you think about after-school programs, you think about the focus on education.
Safe harbor.
All of those kinds of things are wrapped in the library beyond just the economic development piece. And so I think that above and beyond all of the other budget battles that are sort of playing out behind the scenes, this is the one that I think will be the most fascinating to watch and see how it plays out. That's not to say there's not money to be shaved or there's a shared sacrifice or all of those kinds of things. But this has, I think, a number of implications beyond just the dollars and cents.
It hit me that way when I saw it. It's like, ooh, this one's going to be, this is like up there with fire department, if you ask me. Guys, we've just received the 8-minute warning, so it's like we're going to have to go into emergency
speed round
mode here, right? Just speed things up. I turn it over to you guys. Okay, where do you want to go from here? I want to talk about Roger Simon and Bill Daley. I thought that was really interesting. I want to talk about ComEd, and Steve, you on your own program when you were subbing on 848, you had this incredible conversation I thought the other day about Pat Quinn, and what was Pat Quinn thinking? He comes out with this, I am drawing the line in the sand on this ComEd thing. It's not going to, and then just overwhelmingly he gets defeated.
I mean, it was a massive rebuke by the leaders of the legislature and individual lawmakers on something. It was not just a rebuke of an ordinary veto. We're talking about a significant piece of legislation that, as you said, Quinn came out publicly on multiple occasions, also joined by Attorney General Lisa Madigan, and on really a pet issue for him. I mean, this is a guy whose political career has largely been based, not entirely, but largely based on his persona and his work as an advocate on behalf of consumers. Obviously, he was the guy that led the charge of the development of Cub. So this is an issue he knows a lot about, has a lot of history with, and to be overridden with that kind of majority was really a finger in the eye by Democrats. That's the other thing. And I think, politically, what's interesting here, we could talk for several episodes about just Pat Quinn and his political handlings in Springfield. But I think what's interesting here is, and this was raised in the conversation we had on WBEZ, that this is an instance where, and you're also seeing on the gambling legislation, where Quinn comes out very, very late in the game. Mm-hmm. He and his staffers aren't at the table early on. In some cases, they're not asserting themselves early on. In other cases, they're not being invited. And they come out and make a big public display very late in the game. And it's sort of an all-or-nothing political strategy. And it hasn't served his power in Springfield. And we saw that, obviously, with just this most recent veto, but we've seen it in other cases, and it will also be interesting to see what happens with the casino legislation.
Well, yeah, it doesn't bode well for the casino legislation. No, that's far more complex and
many more issues there.
Pulling together a coalition.
And he may actually win on this just because of the complexity.
Or you can win parts of it.
That's right. Yeah.
Which you couldn't do with ComEd.
Right.
Yeah. But I just wonder if, because of his years as a consumer advocate and him always being the guy that is tilting at the windmills, that he's still better at tilting at windmills than leading.
Well, and I think that's one of the keys. I mean, the core things that have made he's been remarkably successful in politics. There's no question about it. You don't get to be governor of Illinois, you don't get to be state treasurer, and all of the other positions he's held without being a smart politician. However, the skill sets that he has applied to politics over the years are a very, very different set of skills. It's an outside game. It's about mobilizing public support. It's about grassroots, about being a gadfly. It's about working outside the party apparatus. Well, as governor, you are, number one, a chief executive, but you're also on the inside. And it's clear that he is struggling to find and develop the relationships and the connections and the rhythm to play that inside game effectively. And he continues to be outmaneuvered by his Democratic counterparts in the legislature.
Yeah, guys that have a lot more experience at that sort of game. Madigan and Cullerton.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about Rebecca Pallmeyer. The judge yesterday affirmed that former Mayor Daley will have to be deposed in the Michael Tillman case, that sounds rather boring when you put it that way. It sounds like just very gray, but when you think about it, no. Richard M. Daley is going to sit down across from Flint Taylor, and Flint Taylor, who has waited his entire life to ask Daley about his role in the torture. Take it. What does that mean?
Well, the whole John Burge case, and the guy that him and his crew. He was just convicted not for torture, but for lying about saying he didn't torture people.
Right.
So,
there's always you can't say anything.
Of course, Rich Daley was the former state's attorney when these allegations were first raised, and he could never be deposed in connection with that because the state's attorney have immunity. But there were certain things he did as mayor, as these cases and allegations wound their way through the system, that Flint Taylor made the argument, I can go and ask him if he ignored this torture, if he did anything at all to suppress exposing it or anything like that. And the federal judge came back and said, yes, you can ask him as relates to his term as mayor, you know, about those questions. And the law department fought it, said, no, you can't do that. And Flint Teller's won up to this point. We'll see if they appeal that, you know, up the food chain in the federal courts.
But this is a big deal, though, right?
Oh yeah,
It
well, he was
a very big deal.
He was asked once. He did a deposition when there was an investigation authorized by the chief judge in Cook County. It was a very polite deposition. I have a feeling from watching Flint Teller in action for a number of years that well, he'll probably be polite, but he'll be very pointed.
So, you know, in our waning seconds almost here, let's weigh in on this Bill Daley, the comments that he gave to Roger Simon, where he said that Rahm Emanuel wasn't really all that popular in the White House, and I mean, almost comes out and says that, you know, look, we engineered this whole thing just to get him the heck out of the White House because we didn't want him around there. You guys take him. I mean, that's not what he said, but you could almost read that into it.
Well, and there have been other suggestions to that effect that have sort of percolated and bubbled up here and there before this particular piece. It's also interesting because, you know, it's my understanding that Bill Daley and Rahm Emanuel are very personally close, much closer than Mayor Emanuel is or was with Mayor Daley, the former Mayor Daley. So I think, you know, it speaks volumes about the political messages that the Obama White House is trying to send, and perhaps the message that the Daley family might be sending too about this early administration. I don't know how you guys read it.
Well, as much as I think everyone should rely on the Tribune for all the news, this was a great interview. It was in Politico, and what I found interesting about it, if you take sort of a step back from it, is that these guys used to work in the Clinton White House together. They came up together a little bit. There's this age difference, and that's what Daley's sort of talking about. It's like Rahm Emanuel had his career to think about, and he had to get noticed, and he had to work the media, and he's not necessarily faulting him for it, but saying this is what he was doing. I don't have to do that.
Saying, I don't want to be the leaker in chief.
Yeah, right. You know, and so it was very frank. I'm amazed at how he got Daley to lay it out. Although, of course, you know, Bill Daley probably doesn't do an interview and say things by accident. So you got to wonder what the message is.
And Roger Simon has a follow-up today in the Sun-Times where he's saying that, you know, people have been saying, were you both drunk? I mean, how else could that interview have happened? And he said, no, obviously, no, we were not. And the tape recorder was sitting right on the table between us. And Bill Daley said, is this on the record? And I said, yes. So, I mean, as like you say, you're dealing with leaker in chief. You're dealing with people who are absolutely at the absolute top of the mastery
of their sophistication,
of the ability to control the media, right, and handle messages. And they're sending all of these weird messages about one another, and it's just it's like this kind of quiet battle that's going on, but it's
well, and we should point out, I mean, Bill Daley's been criticized inside the Beltway for his role thus far as chief of staff too. Some are saying he's not running the operation in the way that he should. So that also, I think, factors into this.
You got to wonder if it's more about him defending himself in his current role, or if it's more about it's a local issue and the Daley's trying to kind of be a little bit defensive of the line that Rahm Emanuel has kind of walked in, saying we're going to change things. He's in rhetoric, at least, he's been kind of surprisingly affrontive of the Daley years.
Well, that's where we're going to have to drop it. I'm really sorry, but I just want to keep going. But the tyranny of the clock is saying, I now have to say to you, you've been watching Chicago Newsroom right here on CAN TV. It's a community service of CAN TV. You can see this and all the CAN TV programs right here or on cantv.blip.tv. You can watch us there, and you can also subscribe to that iTunes podcast, which I'd really like to get you to do. Elias Cepeda from Make Big Plans Chicago, just starting today. Hal Dardick from the venerable Chicago Tribune, and the venerable Steve Edwards from the venerable Chicago Public Media, WBEZ. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time right here on Chicago Newsroom. I'm Ken Davis. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time.